There are some who may not know this, but for years, one of my all-time favorite cartoons was Gravity Falls. There was so much to love about that show. From the characters, to the visuals, to the premise itself. Back when the show started, I had my doubts on it, and that feeling stuck around for a good long while. Is this really as good as everyone claims it is? Then in late August 2015, I finally caved in and gave it a shot, and whoo boy! This experience was so much fun! I found myself breezing through multiple episodes on a daily basis. I really felt for these characters. I grew wildly invested in the story, and the twist they pulled actually managed to take me by surprise. And that's really hard to do. Going through the show was one of the fondest experiences I've ever had. But as great as the show was, I'll never forget the tragedy I was put through after finding out from Alex himself that the show was ending. And just barely 3 months after I started watching it. Needless to say, I was crushed. I would constantly glare at that post as I would say to myself, no, Alex, this isn't fair. I started watching this not too long ago. I grew invested in the show. You can't do this to me! As you may imagine, I still kind of miss this show, and I flat out regret waiting so long to check it out. But I'm still thankful for watching it regardless, for this was one of the most unique cartoons I've ever seen. And even in recent years, I still have yet to see a Disney cartoon, or any cartoon in particular, that could even compare to the likes of Gravity Falls. Oh, house! Wait, what? What was that? Oh, house! As we've all painfully learned, 2020 has given us misfortunes that left a harsh impact on the world. But the fact that this kind of show was able to premiere that same year was most likely a sign of hope. Or maybe just a coincidence, but still, there's a lot to love about this show, which I'll slowly go through, but first a rundown of the story, at least up to the point of recording, so warning, spoilers ahead! The main character Luz is being sent to a summer camp since no one seems to approve of her interests or hobbies, and that includes making AMVs. I'm not even kidding. So as her curiosity gets the better of her, she ends up wandering into the Boiling Isles, part of the Demon Realm. There she meets many friends, the closest being Ida, King, and Hootie. While Luz learns more about this new dimension, she grows quite attached to the atmosphere, so she decides to stick around. And in case of emergencies, Ida's holding onto a door which seems to be the only way back to the real world. She's been keeping this door secure, up to a point anyway, but now I'm starting to get ahead of myself. The main reason Luz decides to stay in the Boiling Isles is because A, she feels more accepted there, and B, she wants to find out how to become a witch after seeing what Ida's capable of. So after getting a few pointers from Ida, she starts her training at Hexside, but not right away as she faces a series of obstacles and inconveniences beforehand. But fortunately for her, she gets enrolled by the end of it all anyway. While there, she meets other characters like Willow, Gus, and Amity, whom I'll go more into later. As for Ida's story, we find out that she's been classified as the most wanted witch in the land. But surprisingly, they haven't shown a whole lot of attempts to take her down. Sure, we get to see quite a handful in a few episodes, but if they really think she's that dangerous, don't you think attacks on her would be more frequent? My guess is she's proven she's got the power to scare off a majority of the interested parties. Well, that and she seems to be great for business among smaller merchants. Then there's Bill King. What can I say? Their voices are pretty much the same, minus the filter they gave Bill. Yeah, I know they have the same actor, and he's still kind of like Bill. He tends to go through odd behavior from time to time, but he's nowhere near as destructive or messed up as Bill. So when he first meets Luz, he's on a mission to get his crown back, which is implied to have the power to change the Boiling Isles.
Wait a second. Is that a...
My crown!
Psych!
It's not until episode 3 when Luz ends up meeting other side characters like Willow and Amity. Oh boy, Amity. She really took me by surprise. Ever since I started watching the show, I was curious to see what she was going to be like in particular, as before watching the show, I've been seeing a ton of art and screen caps involving her. And she seemed to get along really well with Luz, so knowing this was the scene they were going to meet, I figured, surely they're going to have a sweet little rendezvous right off the bat, right?
Wrong-o.
For the life of me, I would have never expected her to start off as a villain, and yet, that was what we got. Thankfully, she's given quite a redemption treatment throughout the show, just like Pacifica from Gravity Falls. Though I have to say, I found the redemption arc was handled more smoothly in this show. In summary, Pacifica was acting like a total schmuck and never really showed any sign of change until halfway through season 2. And even after all that, the outcome was still a little questionable. Meanwhile, they gave Amity more time to learn and interact with Luz and her friends to understand their issues and how to grow from them. And this helped flesh out her story arc over time. There's more to learn about her, but I don't want to give it all out till later. As for Luz's other friends, Willow specializes with plant magic, and Gus is obsessed with learning about humans and the real world. Sure, they may not sound like important characters right off the bat, but, as should be expected, their traits and backstories are more explored upon over time. And the writers certainly didn't disappoint. One of the best episodes we got from Willow was, well, Understanding Willow, where Amity ends up accidentally botching Willow's memories, so she and Luz have to travel inside her just to save her. It was a neat adventure, and we got to learn so much about Willow in such a limited time frame too. As for Gus, well, I have a favorite episode centered around him too, but I know I've been saying this a lot, but I'll get to that later. This shows a lot of neat episodes and details down the road, especially in season 2, which I don't want to give away until we get there. So like I was saying earlier, Amity was the character I wanted to learn about, even before I started watching the show, and my prayers were answered through a variety of episodes throughout, especially in season 1. I kid you not, in Convention, Amity's second appearance, she starts to show signs of progression. But of course this wasn't going to be enough to reform her, considering this was just a few days or weeks after we saw her acting evil toward Luz and Willow. At best, they get the chance to sit and talk things out, but their connection starts giving off a far brighter glow in a later episode, Lost in Language, as Luz learns much more about Amity, and they have to legit fight for their lives together. And this leads to them being friends for the time being. But then we got that episode, Enchanting Gromfrite, my personal favorite episode. This was where the circumstances rose from promising to utterly satisfying. From the girls working together fighting the Grom to their fighting style as a whole, and then there was the reveal that Amity wanted a girlfriend relationship with Luz. My god, that is so sweet! There were so many enjoyable elements in this episode alone, they could have made this the season finale, and I wouldn't complain. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the finale we got instead was terrible or anything. I mostly felt this episode had just as strong finale material. Speaking of which, I've been putting this off long enough, so it's about time we get around to the season 1 finale. So in the last 2 episodes of the season, our heroes have to encounter their biggest challenge, the leader of the Boiling Isles, Emperor Bellows. What? You didn't think Amity was going to be the only villain the show got, did you? Of course not! The gang runs into a handful of other threats over time. Pinette, Bosha, Tibbles, the Warden Wrath, and even Ida's own sister, Lilith. What's this? I wait till just now to bring her up? Well, obviously, she was involved in one of the biggest twists. Not just in the season, but the whole show. Now, if you've made it this far and still not seen the show, last warning, this is where the spoilers start getting deep. In the episode The Intruder, Luz finds out that Ida's a victim of a long-time curse that turns her into a creature they call
the Owl Beast.
Basically a vicious monster that completely takes over her body and mind, which she needs elixirs to control. Up to a point anyway. And what's this got to do with the finale, some may be asking? Well, as you'd expect, the curse had to start somewhere. Someone must have caused her to fall victim to it in the first place. But who? Could it be Bellows? Or maybe Tibbles? No. As it turns out, it happened to be the one you'd probably least expect, Lilith. That's right. This downward spiral in Ida's life was built from nothing more than a mashup of paranoia and sibling envy. Shameful. However, we find out that Lilith regrets her past decisions, and she's desperate enough to do anything she can to save Ida, including handing her over to Bellows, as she feels he can bring her curse to an end. But we all know how this story arc plays out. The mastermind turns against the servant who ends up being treated unfairly.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Luz even gives it all she's got to infiltrate the palace and save Ida. But alas, this came with the price of losing her only way back to the real world, leaving her completely trapped in the Boiling Isles. Or is she? Well, we'll go more into that in just a minute.
Don't say it!
With no other choice, Lilith takes part of the curse just to save Ida herself. So the good news is that Ida's okay now. The bad news? Their powers are gone. But at least they have alternatives. they still have the option to resort to paper spells that Luz has been using all this time. So all's well that ends well, or as well as possible I suppose, and thus ends the story. Until Season 2 started. So after learning about what Lilith did back in the Season 1 finale, I was rather appalled by her at the time. Especially since they practically decided to let her off scot-free. However, she somewhat redeemed herself by saving Ida, and she does a bit more in the second season. She's proved to be quite helpful in multiple situations, and her personality has gotten a bit more charming over time. Those glasses certainly help make her more adorable. Well, anyway, the main plot for the season is that Luz is going on multiple quests and missions trying to find a different way back to the real world, after she lost her original way thanks to Bellows. And let me tell you, she doesn't hesitate to try anything, including traveling through time and portals. I wasn't kidding around when I said Season 2 had much more to offer, and it doesn't even stop there. We finally get to learn more about Bellows and King as their backstories are more uncovered. Amity changes her hair to that lovely purple style we all recognize today. Hunter, or the Golden Guard as some call him, goes through a redemption arc of his own, and we learn more about Ida's family and her closest childhood friend, Rain, whom, you guessed it, I'll go more into later. So remember Hooty?
Hooty's got a wonderful, awful idea.
I was hardly bringing him up for a few reasons. For starters, I always found him a little annoying. Not terrible, but I feel they made him a little too obnoxious. And for a while, he did surprisingly little for the story. He still did things in past episodes, although it was only once in a great while. But all that changed in this season. The biggest episode, for example, was Knock Knock Knockin' on Hooty's door. Finally, Hooty gets a full-out time to shine! It's pretty much what you'd expect from Hooty, but I still found it very charming. With extremely likable intentions, he's got a lot in store. He knows his friends are going through problems, and decides to help give them a boost. Helping King try to find his past, helping Ida recover, and helping Luz and Amity with their relationship. Although the results are just as you'd imagine, but it wasn't all bad. After diving into some of Ida's family history, she starts to cope with
The Owl Beast.
and this allows her curse to take on a different form, into more of a harpy. As for Luz and Amity, well, despite a few rocky incidents, there were still quite a few beautiful moments that came from it. And this all leads to the two of them sealing their fate. I can see why so many people enjoyed this episode. There was a lot to take in from it, and Hooty was a bit more tolerable for a change. You know who else got an episode this season that helped expand their character? Someone who we haven't given the spotlight to in a while? That's right, Gus. His big moments come into play in Labyrinth Runners, as he runs into another encounter with Hunter, who, as I said earlier, had quite a few events on his end too. He went from total servitude for Bellows to slowly going down his own route, which included getting his own palace men, helping Luz fight a dragon, being Amity's guide, and teams up with Willow in Flyer Derby. But it wasn't until Hollow Mind when Hunter finally discovered the truth about Bellows and turned against him to save everyone. Which brings us back to Gus. Gus creates a huge flow of illusions as an attempt to escape the Coven's new bounty hunter, Gray. And while trekking for the way out with Hunter, they end up learning a lot about each other, their pasts and their fears, leading to some rather touching and powerful moments between the two. And by the end of it all, Hunter finally gives out his warning about the Day of Unity. What's that exactly? I'll go all out into it right after this. So, what else happened up to this point? Well, there was plenty of impact on Ida's side, among everything else. We finally get to see Ida's parents, Dell and Gwendolyn. Despite not seeing a whole lot of Dell during this time, it's still very warming to see him spending time with Ida. Gwen, on the other hand, was a bit more of a struggle to watch. Seeing how gullible but also forceful she can be at the same time, it reminds me too much of certain real-life people in this world, which we've been seeing more of as the years go on, and it just hurts the more I think about it. So let's move on, shall we? At one point, Ida reunites with Rain, her friend from her childhood years. Just like the other heroes, Rain's giving all they've got to take down Bellows too, and this involves starting the Bats, or Bards Against the Throne. Ida first met Rain at a training program, and they hit it up pretty well together for a while, even after being apart for so many years. But it wasn't until the Coven Day Parade when Rain started acting a little suspicious. And all the evidence pointed to Terra, another Coven leader who's got some tricks up her sleeve for everyone, even some who were already on Bellows' side, like Kikimora.
So, what's the promotion? Who's under my command? What do I get?
You get nothing! You lose!
But unlike Kikimora, Rain's been secretly going behind Terra's back and faking obedience, all for the sake of aiding Darius and the rest of the bats to take down Bellows and prevent the Day of Unity. Was first addressed by Bellows himself back during the Coven Day Parade, as he tried to make what he plans as the start of a tyranny to sound more like a dream world. This is what ended up being the biggest potential threat, for not just the Boiling Isles, but for the whole demon realm up to this point. This starts with eradicating any and all wild magic. But as powerful as he may seem, this was one thing Bellows couldn't do alone. He's been resorting to outside help from the Collector, a supernatural being who's implied to possess supreme power. But isn't it strange? When Luz first heard about the Collector after going to the past, he was with a researcher named Philip. So how'd he end up with Bellows? Well, we'll find out in just a moment. Alright, you know what? Screw it. Let's go into it now. As we later find out, this whole time, Bellows and Philip were one and the same. He started off in the real world, but discovered the Boiling Isles and quickly took over. And now Philip's looking for a way back to the real world. But he lacks the biggest tool to do so, Titan's blood. That is, until he finds out that Ida had some stored in her key all along. It may look like he's close to winning, but he's got one obstacle that tries to slow him down. The bats. Or as they're later called, the Covens against the throne. Or the cats.
I'm a cat now.
So as you'd imagine, this fiendish emperor turns against the Collector and thinks he's finally snagged the high ground. But the tables turn when King befriends Collector. Meanwhile, outside of all this, Ida and Rain are left outnumbered, stuck fighting the Coven themselves. However, only one makes it out. So with the Titan's blood, the door finally opened up again. And did Luz use it? Hold it. This may sound exciting, but even this came with a hideous price. And this all leaves us where we are now, at the end of Season 2, left with even more cliffhangers than the writers could ever imagine during the first season's production. Oh man! Next to Gravity Falls, I can't remember the last time I felt this way about a cartoon. While I wouldn't call it perfect, I'm sure if I looked hard enough I'd find something else I didn't like about it, but this show had a level of effort and quality decent enough to call it beautiful. I said before that the Enchanting Gromfright was my favorite episode, but I gotta tell ya, that episode had a ton of competitors. Despite mentioning only a handful of specific episodes, there were many more enjoyable episodes that can give you the feels. Besides Ida, there were other family moments too, like on Luz's side, how she's trying to get back to her mom, or revealing her dad's passing. Or even on Amity's side, when she tries to fight against her parents until her dad pairs up with her. Or if you're in the mood for a grand old time in general, then this is still a huge recommendation. So many episodes stood out, like Understanding Willow, Echoes of the Past, Lost in Language, Escape from the Palisman, Knock Knock Knocking on Hootie's Door, Labyrinth Runners, Reaching Out, etc., etc. You get it. The team gave it all they got and made this show a definite must-watch. Thanks to you all, especially you, Dana Terrace.